What's up, everybody? My name is Keilan Morrissey, and you're watching Keeping It Keilan. Today we're going to be talking about the saddest and darkest movie ending I think I've ever seen. So, let's start the story at the beginning. Back in 2019, first month of 2019, I made a commitment to read more. I wanted to rediscover my love of literature that had been buried by tedious school assignments and enforced reading that wasn't really my jam. So I wanted to get back into reading for fun and reading just for the love of reading. And I did. And the first book that I read on this reading quest was Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King. I discovered it at an old bookshelf in my grandparents' house one night, and I just started reading it. And that was really when I got sucked back into reading for the first time. I read many other books throughout the year, and since Stephen King was the author of that first book, I read a couple more Stephen King books just out of interest. I had been a pretty big fan of his movies, and I had read some of his books back in the day, but I wanted to, immerse myself in his work just a little more because he seemed like a pretty interesting guy with interesting stories. So one of the next books by Stephen King that I read is where our story truly begins, and that is The Mist. So The Mist, I had seen trailers for the movie, and I had heard good things about the movie, but I had never read the book, and I didn't know anything about the book whatsoever. So I got the book, and I read it. It was a good book. To me personally, the book wasn't incredibly emotional. I didn't feel like a strong, passionate connection to any of the characters, but it's in the horror genre, so I don't typically expect a strong connection to the characters in horror. It's really cool when horror movies and horror books do that, but this wasn't an exception to the rule. So what really held the book together, in my opinion, was the fear factor rather than anything else. And I think that's exactly what King wanted to do, what he wanted to accomplish, and he did so amazingly. The fear in the book was very well done. It could potentially be classified, and is classified by some, as Lovecraftian horror, which is science fiction horror. The biggest, scariest thing in the book was the unknown, which I think is the general premise of most Lovecraftian science fiction horror stories, is that the unknown is scary. What we don't know, what we can't comprehend, what our human minds cannot wrap around is scary and frightening, and yeah. So this book is about a father and a son who get trapped in a supermarket along with a bunch of other people when there's this eerie, enormous mist that covers practically the entire city. There are monsters in the mist, crazy, wild, alien-y monsters. Of course, there's all kinds of different reactions to this, right? One character in particular who takes a very, very religious stance immediately. There's some who say, there's no monsters out in the mist. It's all a myth. It's all a hoax. It's whatever. Then there's some people who are like taking the real approach. They're like, okay, we've seen the monsters. We recognize those monsters. How can we survive? How can we take care of everybody, right? So by having a supermarket, you're going to naturally have a mix of people. Like, people don't go to the supermarket to share their common beliefs. They go to get their food. Everyone has to get food. So everyone there is different, right? There's all kinds of different people. And so it's really interesting to see how this random pool of human beings gravitates towards different beliefs in this time of crisis and unknownness. So the book has some really interesting themes, has some very cool monsters. Of course, the monsters are wild, and Stephen King describes them in a really awesome way. The father and son relationship, I think, is probably the strongest relationship that I actually feel something for. And in general, the book is just well written. He has a really great writing style. If you've ever read any of his books, I'm sure you know. It's very distinct. It's very recognizable. I'm reading a book right now that's actually his writing memoir. It's his like tips and tricks for the craft of writing, and that's really interesting. He has some really cool advice, which I'll have to do another video on once I finish that book. I'm getting sidetracked here. The book itself was good, and the ending of the book. I'm not going to spoil the ending of the book. I am going to make a comment on the nature of the ending of the book. So the ending of the book leaves things somewhat unknown. It gives readers a feeling of there could be more to come. We don't know. things might turn out one way, they might turn out another way. That's the general feeling you get at the end of the book. So I finished the book and I was like, okay, fair ending. That's decent. So I put the book aside, and then a month or two later, I said, you know what? I should watch that movie, The Mist. There's a movie about that, right? Yeah. I remember seeing the trailer. So I'm like, hey, Mom, Dad, you want to watch the 100th movie we've watched in lockdown? And they're like, of course. So we queue up The Mist, and I tell them a little bit about the book, a little bit of background, and they're like, sounds cool. So we watch it. As we're watching it, I'm noticing a lot of similarities to the book. It's very similar to the book in its story. Like, they got a lot of stuff spot on. There were parts where the dialogue was exactly the same, and what I had imagined in my head is exactly what happened. There's a few things in the book that they had to leave out, of course, because it's, you can't always fit a several 100-page book into a movie. You just can't always fit everything. So naturally, there are some things that didn't make it into the cut of the movie, which is fine. And what's most important is that the characters were spot on, the environments and the ambiance were great, and the monsters were amazing. For this being made in the early 2000s, the CGI was very impressive and believable. You could tell it was animation, but it was still fairly convincing, and it looked good. It had a very neat aesthetic to it. So it was all awesome. And I also thought that maybe since this movie was made in the early 2000s and animation wasn't as evolved as it is today, I thought maybe they might shy away from showing the monsters. Like, we'll see the silhouettes of monsters in the mist, but no, they showed the monsters. The monsters were not concealed in any fashion. So I'm glad that they didn't shy away from that. So it was a well done movie. It was the furthest thing from just a cheap, traditional, predictable, standard, formulaic horror movie. It was not that. So I was enjoying it a lot. I really was. And then came the ending. The ending of the Mist film is not the same as the ending of the Mist book. And that really shocked me, because so much of the movie, all of the movie, was basically exactly what happened in the book. And then I've been telling my parents, I'm like, oh, yep, that happened in the book. That happened in the book. Yep, that happened in the book too. Then we get to the ending, and it was different. It was very different. And there were audible gasps. Everyone was just like, what? What? It was ridiculous. It was truly a ridiculously sad and dark ending. And I'll spoil it in a minute, but let me do a little more spoiler-free talk first. So this ending shocked me, and it just was, woo! My parents were like, why would you not warn us? And I'm like, this was not how the book ended. I was so taken aback. And so what happened after we watched it was my mom did a little research on this, as she likes to do, after watching a movie or show that leaves us all shocked. And it turns out that this movie was directed by the same guy who did Shawshank Redemption, right? Which is another great movie. And that movie was supposed to demonstrate the theme of hope. Like, when there's hope in hard times. When in the darkness, you can find the hope, right? That's what Shawshank Redemption was all about. So with this movie, he wanted to do a full 180. And he wanted to say, this is what it looks like when there is no hope. This is what absolute hopelessness looks like. And knowing that, changed my perspective on the movie completely. And apparently, this director asked Stephen King for his blessing to do that, and Stephen King approved. But a lot of fans, I believe, were very upset because this was so different. It was a very well done ending. There's no doubt about that. But it was different. Okay, now let's do some spoiler talk. So if you do not want the ending of this movie spoiled, then go ahead and click away. But I'm going to say what happens in the ending, and we're going to talk about how dark it is and how I don't think anything can really get darker than this. So basically, earlier in the film, the dad is talking to the son, and the son is like, Daddy, I don't want the monsters to take me. And the dad makes a promise to the son that he will not let the monsters get him, right? Okay. So at the end of the movie, the dad, the son, and I believe two other people, two older folks, all managed to get into his car, and they managed to start driving off. They just are going to keep driving. They don't know what is out there. They don't know if they keep driving for a day, maybe they'll get out of the mist. I mean, they have no idea. They have no contact with the outside world, right? So they just keep going. They drive and they drive and they drive, hoping that they'll make it out of the mist, hoping there will be someone or something or some sign of help. They just keep driving through the mist, keep driving. And then after maybe a day, maybe several days, I don't know exactly, but they have been driving for a substantial amount of time, and then they run out of gas. The car stops. You hear the monsters in the distance. You hear them. You know there's monsters out there. The dad looks around, the two people in the back, and at his son. His son's sleeping. He pulls out his gun. He looks at the two folks in the back with an expression that's just like, what do I do? We've made it this far, but now we can't go any further. For miles and miles and miles, this mist of monsters goes on. There's nothing else we can do. They're going to get us. We're just a sitting duck here in this car. You just see that in his expression. And he's looking at them, and they just nod. They know what needs to happen. So he cocks the gun. And he's ready to shoot. He's ready to shoot these two people, his son and himself. The son wakes up. The son looks at him. We then see a shot from outside the car. 3 bullets are fired. We see back inside the car. He killed the 2 people in the back seat. He killed his own son. And he's trying to kill himself. But he's out of bullets. Just the agony, the pure agony of having to kill your son and then still be alive to feel the pain. Because his plan in his mind was, of course, this is the worst thing any human has ever had to do, killing their own son. It's the worst. Oh my God, I'm going to do it, and then I'll immediately kill myself so I won't have to feel the intense remorse, right? But he can't. And so he's left alive with the deepest emotional pain and trauma imaginable. And he's just sitting there, and he just starts screaming. And it's the most haunting thing. He just starts screaming with pain. You hear the rumble in the distance. The monsters are coming. He gets out of the car. He's ready for the monster to take him. But it's not monsters. It's the military. The military comes through. The mist is clearing. They have a bunch of people on their tanks that they've rescued. And everything seems like it's going to be okay. So he's left there, having just killed 3 people, one of which is his son. And then he immediately faces the realization that he did not have to do that. That sacrifice he made was completely pointless. And had he waited another 5 minutes, he would have known that. But he did it because he didn't want to break that promise to his son. Man. That is... Oh my gosh. Just thinking about that. Whew, yeah. So in my opinion, that is the darkest and saddest movie ending of all time. And I'll tell you what, there have been movies where I have definitely like cried more than that or felt a more personal sadness than I did in that movie, for sure. But in principle, in concept, you don't get anything sadder than that, right? Because here's the thing. It's like you can't get sadder than that. You have a father and a son, right? Sad would be the father dying and the son moving on, right? That's happened in a lot of movies. Super sad would be the son dying. I mean, come on. Killing the kid is like off limits in most movies. And then ridiculously sad is the father having to kill the son and then killing himself. But ultra sad is the father killing the son and then trying to kill himself and then being unable to, and then just feeling this overwhelming sense of grief and sorrow and regret. And then the final tear of sadness is even beyond that. They pushed it even further, and they said, okay, we're going to do all that, and then he's going to realize it was for nothing. And so that's 5 times that they took something that could have been sad, and they made it twice that sad. They did that 5 times and made it just... And the reason that's so successful is because it's not so outlandish, right? Because it's what makes things more sad than other things in movies. Like, if a whole planet explodes, that's less sad than a father killing a son. And why is that? I mean, if a whole planet explodes, then animals and babies and children and everyone dies if a planet explodes. But I've watched movies and shows and sci-fi stuff where a planet explodes and it's like, well, dang. And it's because our minds can't quite grasp the intensity of that. We don't see every living being on a personal, individual level on that planet. If we did, that might be the saddest thing ever. If we literally saw a billion people in their last moments with their loved ones, that might be sadder. But then you don't get the fact that it's built up to it the whole movie. You don't get to know the relationship between any of those people. It's just, oh, there's people, boom, they're gone. So what The Mist did was it gave you characters that you knew, characters that had an established relationship, and then it just twisted them at the end into the most sad possible scenario. Because you get all the emotions there. You get sadness, you get grief, regret, remorse, and just pure loss. I mean, everything that you could feel that's bad, that man was feeling in that moment. And his screams just carry that so well. That is why that movie has, in my opinion, the darkest and saddest ending of all time. Man, if you want a version of that story that doesn't end in the most tragic way possible, then read the book. Or maybe watch the series. I haven't watched the series. There is a TV series about The Mist. Imagine if that ended in an even more sad way. But basically, yeah, that's the gist of The Mist. I did not even mean to rhyme there. I'm a poet. I didn't even realize I was. So check out The Mist if you haven't. I really do recommend it. I mean, from a filmmaker standpoint, it was really well done. Really, really, really well done. And as someone who likes to incorporate a lot of sad, dark things into my films, I mean, that was well done. And that's hard to top. So that's just about all I have to say about The Mist. I hope that everyone has an amazing day. I hope that you check out that movie, So thank you all. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Keeping It Keilan. Go ahead and subscribe. Subscribe for me. Helps so much. You don't even know. Thank you, everybody. Have an amazing day. Catch you in the next episode.